are recording. Hi.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good. I missed you last week.
I know. Yeah, I missed you too. It's always weird
For
when we
sure.
don't record.
I know, right? But we have a lovely time talking about space today.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Racist space and anti-racist space. Did you think about the space as an outer space, or did you think space like an area?
I definitely was along the lines of space as a place for people with similar personalities or character traits or races or religions to get together. I was along those lines, so I was not completely thrown off.
I low-key was thinking about the movie Hidden Figures. I'm not gonna lie, with outer
Mm,
space. And I was like, oops. We're fine.
not exactly that.
Not exactly that. Although astronomy, the space race, that seems very white centric as well.
Mm,
If we did ever want to talk about outer space being white centric.
yeah. Yeah, I do not think you're wrong.
I mean, most spaces are very white centric.
Yes.
It's where we are. So, starting off, what were your key takeaways? For sure, because it talked a lot about education in this one. And I feel like education is kind of our wheelhouse
I
for
think so.
racism in those spaces.
Yeah, definitely our bread and butter because everything I feel always goes back to education. The thing that stands out to me the most, that I remember the most, is that he was able to separate like spaces, anti-racist spaces and racist spaces, because I've always had trouble differentiating. I remember in high school, we had some type of Black student space,
Mm.
and one of my friends who was white, he was like, yeah, but if we had a white student space, that would be racist. And
Mm.
I knew that wouldn't be like, I knew those were different, but I didn't know how to differentiate.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's different having a space and saying, we're only allowed here, you're all inferior, this is our space, and having a space where we can survive because
Mm-hmm.
we are so heavily attacked in this environment. And I
Yeah.
think he did a really great job of differentiating those.
Yeah, I love how you just pointed out that there's a difference between having a safe space and a space versus an environment, because space is not universal. Space is something that is created.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what I really loved about this chapter is how people of color and like for affinity groups have really had to create their own spaces and their own place in an environment that is inherently racist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of hard to think about space in a conceptual, like, how did this racist space come to be? Because you can't touch it. It's not a policy. It's like an unspoken culture,
Yeah.
because knowing that racism is a culture in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's just where my brain went.
That was some mind blowing as the realizations, but yeah, 100%.
And I was thinking about back whenever we did our props course again, how referring back to where it had affinity groups in racism for people of color, and then it had specific groups for the white people that had to answer to the people of color so that there was still accountability. Do you remember that?
I am blanking on that memory right now. Well, I remember like the infinity groups for Black and brown people. I don't remember the groups for white people.
I remember having an issue of which one I went to
Mm,
because I was like, I don't know if I should be in an Asian space. I don't know if I should be in a white people space because of how I grew up and the privilege that I grew up in, my proximity to whiteness. I think I eventually did go into the Asian space though.
okay. And these were breakout sessions.
Yeah, they were breakout sessions.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of blanked out because, like, honestly, that summer intensive was intensive.
Hmm.
And I think I just trauma blocked it all.
Yeah, by the time we got to prop, I feel it was auto, you know?
It's just over it. I was like, okay, this is grad school, and I definitely feel off my game because I hadn't been in school for a year. And I was like, I am so dumb. How was I allowed to function anywhere? Why did they already give me 1 degree?
It was very intense for 7 months,
No, right?
like right off summer. And I mean, right off a year of taking a break. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just sitting here going like, who decided to give me these degrees? In what, like, why did they do that and then unleash me out onto the world half of the time, just into these spaces where I'm just like, oh yeah, racist
Yeah.
space.
Very important questions.
So I thought it was also really interesting how he brought up, how Kendi brought up that, um, like white collar crimes versus violent crimes that are more highlighted in news media, like, and how people are afraid of certain spaces because of potential like strong arm robberies. It's mostly robberies that people are afraid of, right?
I think so.
Yeah, and how like you can recover from that. Like if someone were to steal my wallet, I left my credit card at a restaurant one time. Like you just close down the credit card and they send you a new one.
Yep.
Like if someone steals your wallet nowadays, it's not that big of a deal.
No.
But people are still afraid of it.
Mhm.
And they're afraid to go into certain neighborhoods that are results of housing policy and redlining and white flight that we know about.
Yeah.
But
Blaming them as opposed to the system.
yeah, exactly. And we know that monetarily, like the losses from white collar crimes that happen in like, suburbs like Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes,
Mhm.
the monetary loss from that is even more devastating, but people aren't as afraid of those crimes. Why is that?
Yeah. Because of who's seen as more dangerous.
Mm-hmm. And that's also not to say like to minimize like physical safety, because physical safety is also something that's like really, like whenever you're in the moment, like your cortisol is up, your adrenaline is up, like that can be scary in the moment, but like
Definitely.
talking about like long terms in terms of spaces. Yeah, really talked about that. Like for me, I grew up in a white space, and I grew up in a suburb that was a result of white flight, and like there is a well documented history of it. And I didn't start really looking into that until I noticed that my church was founded in 1951, and I was like, hmm.
Hmm.
And my dad was at a pastor's meeting one time, and they were talking about why don't we have more Black people here? And I was just like, I don't know how to tell you this, but if you just look at your own personal like history and why this church is where it is, space.
Yeah. There's a clear reason.
And like I've heard pastors preach about like why Sunday is still one of the most segregated days of the week because of that. And I think a lot of what my church was doing in misinterpreting it is like that, like the same thing goes for historically Black colleges and universities. Like they mistook it as like people of color, brown and Black people of color want their own space, and they don't want white people coming in there, and so they're inherently racist against white people just because they have a space, and they're not seeing racism as a systematic issue.
Yeah.
So what about you?
Space.
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 I mean, I grew up in a Black space, and I don't really think I appreciated the space until Columbia, when I was a part of Black Caucus, and it was just like, wow, all of my people in one place, and it just felt like a homecoming, you know. But before college, I feel that I just didn't really appreciate the opportunities I did have, because I mean, the schools I went to, definitely elementary and middle school, were majority white spaces, and then I was in higher classes, so majority white. And then in high school, I was part of Magdeburg, which is again majority white. And I've always had like a pretty diverse group of friends. Didn't really understand like the necessity of a Black space, but I also have a Black family, so I had the space without really acknowledging that it was a space, and didn't really appreciate the space until grad school.
Yeah, that's what is a huge challenge with transracial adoption, is having children of color being raised in a white space, so that emotionally, to talk about race, there isn't really a safe space for us in our own homes. And home is supposed to be the place where you feel the safest. And so if you're not feeling safe in your own homes, I would personally think that that's a huge reason why a lot of transracial adoptees experience depression and anxiety at a higher rate than the general population, is because like even the safest of safe spaces, and even the best saying even the best adoptive and foster homes are not the safest, emotionally speaking, for conversations about race and emotional safety. And people have a lot to say about adoptive and foster homes too not being physically safe.
Right.
So as a transracial adoptee, I do feel like I had a great home that was an emotionally safe space for all of checking all of the boxes except for race. It was not a place I could talk about race. My parents did not relate. And so for that, like I unfortunately did not have that space that you just described with your family, that had similar experiences, to where that it's a safe space for you,
Right.
racially speaking.
And I think another component is like, especially because I didn't know how fortunate I was, right? Everybody doesn't have that space. And a big part of that is some things are just understood. Like we don't, when I grew up and now we don't really talk a lot about race. Some things are just understood. I remember I was listening to Snacks, which is a podcast by two US women's national soccer team players that I totally recommend. And Lynn Williams is a Black woman, and when Black Lives Matter came out, well, like this resurgence starting like pandemic-y era, and she was talking about how in the beginning she had a bunch of Black teammates, and they all talked about their experience, and everybody just kind of already knew what was going to be said because they all had similar experiences, and just the power of that. Yeah, you like, maybe you don't appreciate the entire time, but when it's not there, you definitely notice because you have had it. It's like people just get it. Some things you don't have to explain.
Yeah. I love how you just put that into words, honestly. And I think like the big point that Kendi was trying to make with the school, because we talked about, what did they bring up? They brought up Brown versus Board. They brought up Plessy versus Ferguson, right? Yeah, two really famous cases that we know very well. Like, it was a part of history that I was actually taught, and I'm grateful for, but it was definitely like glossed over, and we didn't talk about like the systemic issues of it, like separate is not equal, but at the same time, it's still how Kendi framed it, that it still considers non-white spaces to be inferior,
Um,
and racism bringing out a ranking of races and color and colorism. Like,
and-
even the most non-racist policies are still racist because there is an understanding, an unwritten and unspoken understanding, quote unquote, that spaces are inferior because of skin color.
mhm. And I'm glad that he pointed out some spaces, like they're not inherently inferior. It's because, so if you've got like a HBCU and a PWI, predominantly white institution, like the HBCU is not inferior. The PWI probably just has more resources available to them. And I was like, okay, that's a really good point, because are we saying that all of these spaces are inferior? Is it really every single one, or is there something systematic? Is there something deeper, which there always is, as to
Yeah.
why these are intentionally being inferior, held down?
Yeah. And it just like, it makes me wonder how we're moving forward with it, because it seems like these policy changes that we try to do, like, necessarily wouldn't fix it. Like, they talked about busing, like
Yeah.
busing kids from one space to a predominantly white space for the better resources. But we're talking about, like, why not just give these spaces more resources?
Right, like why? And I mean, that was another theme, the fact that they were like, no, the Black and brown kids need to be around white people because that helps them. And that was just like so cringy to even read. I was like, no, I mean, I've been to predominantly white schools, and I've been to maybe mixed. I'm not really sure about my high school's deal, but I felt so much more comfortable at my high school being around my peeps. And so if and I mean, that was like a bad school in my state, because it's not a predominantly white school. It's not one that people intentionally, white people, like more affluent white people, put their kids in the school. And so if they had just the same resources, I probably would have done better, and I would have felt more comfortable, which I think is correlated. The fact that
Yeah,
I feel comfortable and I have the resources to then do better.
exactly. We talked about how Kendi had been put in, what were those special classes, the AP classes or
Mhm.
something, and he was one of like 2 or 3 students of color in those classes, and he did, was it significantly worse because he knew that's what was expected of him as the Black student?
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
believe so. I think he internalized that and was like, oh,
yeah,
if you say I'm not gonna do well, so I'm not gonna do well.
exactly.
Mhm.
And we talk about having Black and brown role models, and seeing mentors and role models in places of power, which we don't always get. Like, I think it's, I just think that that is also a resource.
Definitely. And I think I remember reading something that said that kids who make some type of emotional connection to their school
Mhm.
within elementary school, maybe by the third grade, they're more likely to do exceedingly well. And
Mm.
so if you've got a Black teacher, a Black man, Black woman, like whatever, and you connect with them, then that's gonna automatically increase your
Mhm.
odds of succeeding in school.
Yeah. I remember the first adult Asian that I saw in a high place of achievement was probably the Olympics.
Okay.
And it was probably like an ice skater, like Michelle Kwan or Christy Yamaguchi or someone like that. And I remember thinking, okay, does that mean I have to be an ice skater now? We didn't have any ice skating rinks in Texas.
I also wonder, that's a really great point you bring up, like just talking about representation, how important that is. If you would have seen a lot of prominent people of Asian descent in a variety of areas, would that then allow you to think that, hey, I could really do anything because I see all of these people who are just like me succeeding in all these different areas?
Yeah, like whenever kids whenever kids are told, yeah, you can be president one day, or you can do anything you put your mind to. Well, try putting that, like, that's so conceptual. Like, kids see concrete. Kids are going to recognize whether or not they see an adult version of themselves in specific positions. And honestly, there wasn't enough representation for me to see that. And I remember how significant it was whenever Obama was first elected, and people talking about that proverbial glass ceiling or whatever was finally being broken. And then I heard similar rhetoric whenever Kamala Harris was also elected.
Yeah, and I'm extremely glad that, okay, first of all, I love Obama. I think he's one of the most brilliant men to have walked the planet. But then also Kamala, I love that our first woman vice president, like second highest position in the land, I love that she came from HBCU. I think that's amazing.
Snaps for that, obviously. Like, there's so much power in just simple things like representation in spaces of places of power. Like, for a woman of color to be occupying the second highest rank in the US government.
I mean, just that, yeah, in itself, amazing. A legacy, absolutely something that is great for our history.
Like, I know we're like going a little bit off on a tangent because we have gender next chapter. So we're gonna talk about that. Yay. But like, you know, it just seeing people in that space too. That's why space is just space can be such a, like, it's such a difficult concept because it can be a collective space, it can be space as in a position, it can be space as in your emotional space. Like, there's so many different spaces.
Yes, and Kamala, she was talking about, I don't know what interview I was watching, but she was talking about at a HBCU, and I've heard it before, you don't have all of those like stereotypes, you don't have all of that racism and all of those things that you deal with because you're in an all Black space. And so she was like, the opportunities are there, and it's not, and you can also be you can see Black people who are artists and engineers and computer scientists, and you can see a variety. There's not one way to be Black, which, I mean, I think in the last couple of years, our media has done a lot better with representation, but like back, you only saw like one type of Black person in terms of media and news and journals and things of that nature.
I was talking about people of color in the media space with one of my friends the other night, and we were talking about Marvel. And we were talking about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which I haven't seen, but I'm going to see it eventually because I am a Marvel fan.
Okay.
But it's even seeing representation in superheroes, because Falcon is Black. And we did watch one of the behind the scenes extras and the writers were talking about the writing process, because it's set in an alternate universe, modern day, but in this universe, racism obviously still exists. It's just got aliens and mostly aliens in it. But we talked about like racism in America and how it would impact like these storylines, like Captain America. Like, they did also bring up like the Tuskegee trials, because with Captain America, they were trying to experiment and create a super soldier. And so they found out, oh, spoiler alert for anyone that watches Disney and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I am sorry. I haven't seen it, but I already had it spoiled for me, so I'm spoiling it for you. They had been trying the same super soldier serum, and it was going terribly wrong and killing people, obviously, because it's a super soldier serum. And they were testing it out on Black soldiers during the Vietnam War in this storyline. And we were talking about, like, me and my friend were talking about how, like, people were on message boards and like fan sites being like, why did they have to get political about this? And I was like, no, Tuskegee, like, this isn't a new thing. This isn't a new thing that they just came up with. We have historical context for this to exist.
Yeah, this is not out of nowhere. This has happened. It's just so amazing to me that people, and I'm assuming the people who are upset that it got political were white people. It's just so amazing. I mean, with sports, you see athletes really stepping out and talking about Black Lives Matter and just social justice issues, human rights issues. And people are, I can't remember the name of it, of the person, but they said that they can't wait till sports go back to what it was before without the politics. And people ate them up.
Oh,
things are not going back. Things are not going back. That is the problem.
Jackie Robinson, like, seeing the movie with Chadwick Boseman, 42. Like, these space. Black and brown people occupying spaces that were not built for them, and now occupying space, taking space, creating space. It's making white people uncomfortable.
Yes, they can't wait to go back. Like, clearly that was not working for all of us. And it won't, and I love it. It's not going to go back. We're not, okay, first of all, it's not political. Yeah, we need to get that out. And then second of all, it's not going to go back. I mean, for a while, and I mean, in some ways, athletes, actors, actresses, people have been like kept in a little box and they're not able to talk about certain things.
They were told, stay in your lane.
Yes, they were shut up and ball, right? Somebody told LeBron James that, yeah, like, stay in your space. And now they've expanded it and they are who they are authentically, unapologetically. Why? Like, why would they go back? Like, it's not happening.
Why would you stay in your lane, quote unquote, if someone is an athlete of color and they're telling them not to be political? And I was like, oh, okay, can they retire their face? What are you asking for? Because they are still going to be a person of color in a predominantly white space.
Yes. And it's, I mean, like, who are you to tell them, no, stop? I remember when the NFL came back during the pandemic and Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson were playing. Okay, so Houston Texans and
I love you're a sports person.
Oh my gosh, they are my life. But they stood like arm in arm at the beginning of the game, just like as a symbol of standing with Black Lives Matter. And people booed them. It's like, these are predominantly Black and brown guys who deal with racism. Do you really expect them not to say anything?
Colin Kaepernick, like, his entire career was derailed. His entire career was derailed because guess who occupies the spaces of power in professional sports? It ain't people of color all the time.
It's not Black and brown people.
Who are the owners? Who are the owners of these teams?
Yeah, people who very much so benefit from these very racist stay in your space, stay in your lane rhetoric.
It's ultimately white control and white censorship again.
I do love in the WNBA and the National Women's Soccer League and WSL, there are a lot of women owners who are coming forward. There are a lot of Black and brown owners who are coming forward. So I remember with the NBA, WNBA, one of the players now is a partial owner of, I think, the team she played with, Black woman. I love it. I'm here for it.
Where are these news stories? We don't hear about this. Like, which goes back to people of color in the media space. Like, I didn't start getting specific Asian interest news until I started following specifically Asian newscasters.
Yes.
And like, for example, there was another attack on an Asian woman in my old neighborhood again. And I would not have heard about it unless like these Asian newscasters that I follow.
And I would not have heard about it unless you told me. I haven't seen it anywhere.
Like Asian hate crimes are up, I want to say about 200% in New York City.
Just in New York.
Just in New York City.
Wow.
Overall, they were up. I posted about it yesterday. I'm going to look it up so I'm not lying on this. But it's crazy. It's just like, just to be able to get access to our media, our history, things that are happening contemporarily around us, we have to specifically look for these spaces because it's not it's not a part of the environment. We're talking about space.
And this is a white dominated space. This is what happens in white dominated spaces. People's stories are left out.
People's stories are left out, and how significant is that? It is just so significant. Also on my 223%.
Wow.
Of reported
a news article.
Reported crimes, 223%. And whenever I've seen, like, I've gone onto the comment boards because I hate myself and I love torturing myself, apparently, and I've been reading the comments, it's people calling for more mass incarceration, and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
That's not the answer.
Yeah, you can't deal with violence. Yeah.
It's okay. We're just trying to solve racism.
And it's like, I think this comes back at the end of every episode. How do you do this?
Hopefully, now that Kendi has a podcast, we'll learn about it.
Yes, he has a podcast. This is best news of the week, calling it. So excited.
I am so ready for this, honestly. Oh my gosh. But I'm also, like, we're at 30 right now, and I am currently on my lunch break for work. So any final thoughts, rants, ravings that you would like to mention before we wrap up?
I think we covered this really well. I feel good.
Space. Great.
Space. That's going to be the caption. Space.
Not outer space. Space. But yeah, next week is gender, which I am excited about that.
Super excited.
I'm always excited to learn about gender, considering I consider myself cisgendered and heterosexual. So, like, I think it will be interesting to explore, especially if we get into LGBTQIA issues. Considering I just consider myself an ally of that community, and I don't want to take away from what they might say, but I'm excited to explore nonetheless.
Samesies.
All right.
I could always learn more.
All the time. Alrighty. I will see you next week.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.